On this bonus episode of Locked On Jayhawks, KU won and they lost. Late night in the Phog scrimmage recap, takeaways, and some interesting quotes from Bill Self on the broadcast.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Plenty of content today. It was your Late Night in the Phog preview, little KU basketball season preview, so even after Late Night in the Phog, that episode's still pertinent. KU football preview against Houston, and now we're breaking down, recapping what we saw in the quick Late Night in the Phog scrimmage on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So some quick takeaways. I think most of them come, honestly, from Bill Self, who was on the broadcast along with Brian Haney and Greg Gurley, if you watched on ESPN+. So we'll get to some things we learned, some things we didn't learn, what's next for KU basketball. First, this episode is brought to you as well by Prize Picks. And with Prize Picks, you can get in on the action this upcoming weekend for college football, for NFL, for the MLB playoffs. If you're into hockey, NBA starts up next week. I mean, you only get so many Octobers and Novembers of sports in your life. You get the mismatch of sports. Well, you can mismatch everything with Prize Picks. You can take the over on a pitcher's strikeouts, the under on a player to get an amount of goals in the NHL, the over on a player's rushing yards. Ashton Jeanty for Boise State, just probably always go over on that one. You can do that and plenty more with Prize Picks. So check that out with Prize Picks. Okay. So top takeaways, what we learned, I guess, from the scrimmage. And do keep this in mind if you checked out the Late Night in the Phog preview. You can view this two ways. You can view it as the last 2 years. I mean, Kevin led you in scoring last year, but second on the team in scoring during the scrimmage. It was Nick Timberlake. That didn't carry over into the season. And then the year before, Michael Jankovic was top 2 on the team in scoring. And that obviously didn't carry any water for the team. So you can view that. You can also view last year and be like, well, last year, collectively, the two squads, I think, went 5 of 26 from 3, and that clearly was a problem for the team by the end of the year. They didn't really shoot well from 3 in this game, though, either. And based on everything on paper that they brought in, I feel like they're going to be okay from 3-point range. But what we did learn, I thought if you're looking at like who I was most impressed with, it's such a small sample size, and guys aren't playing full on all out. They're not running plays. So like realistically, I regret even wanting to do this, but a couple things I did notice, like I thought Flory Bidunga looked very active, looked very good. You got a couple Bidunga dunks. I think you might have even had 3 of them, which that was great. So that was cool to see. The lobs from DeJuan Harris. David Coit, I thought was a very interesting player from tonight. He hit, I think, 2 threes in the game tonight. Noah Shelby looked pretty good as a walk-on who maybe he's going to earn a scholarship for next year. You're going up in scholarships. Like he looked pretty good from 3-point range in terms of what you brought there. I thought KJ was very active doing a lot of different things on the court for KU, and I thought Raquise Passmore was very active doing a lot of little things. But again, it is such a small thing. Like I could point to him and be like, oh, AJ Storr had a tough game. He missed a bunch of mid-range jump shots. Like, oh no, what are we going to do? AJ Storr's a button. Like, no, that's not the case. Like AJ Storr is going to be fine. Some of that stuff is going to be fine. Going back to David Coit, though. So Bill Self on the broadcast, which if you were there, I would recommend going back on ESPN+. I think you can rewatch the events. Listening to the broadcast, there's a lot of good tidbits there. And he said that David Coit has been the team's best perimeter scorer lately in practice. Now, what does lately mean? Is that a week? Is that 2 weeks? Is it a long period of time where it's enough for David Coit all of the sudden to now be, this big-time player for the team? And it's been tough to figure out, like, we've had Zeke Mayo in the starting lineup recently. How open is that starting spot? And Bill Self said that David Coit hasn't got a chance to start. Now, was that just public-facing comment to put it out there, whatever. But he did make a comment about him having to roll off the bench at the very least and being a scorer for this team, and that he'll have multiple 20-point games for the team this season. So Sounds to me like David Coit is very much etching himself into a role. Could that be the role of the minutes that we're going to go to Shaquille Moore? Could that be some minutes away from Zeke Mayo? Could that be some minutes away from like guys like AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin that you just end up playing more guards? It certainly would be a small lineup because Coit's only like 5'8", and he made a comment, did Bill Self, about that Remy Martin made David Coit look, or David Coit made Remy Martin look small. David Coit made Remy Martin look big. Basically, that David Coit is way smaller than Remy Martin, who was not like the biggest guy in the world. So how much can you survive playing David Coit next to DeJuan Harris there? But he looked pretty good offensively, and those were interesting comments from Bill Self. We did see KJ Adams take a three. It almost banked in, so I don't know that that'll be a part of the system in season for KU. I thought he looked noticeably quicker, though, on the floor for KU. He had a little bit more quickness, I thought, in his game. Other things that stood out, I mentioned the Bidunga dunks. Those were fun. Rakeem Passmore got up there, and he was active, doing a lot of little things. Bill Self, I think on one breakaway when he had that dunk, he goes, that's a player there. I might be paraphrasing. I don't know if that was the exact, but like that was kind of what he said, that he was, he thinks he's going to be a good player. How much leads a role in year one? I don't know. We'll see. And then going back to the Flory idea, he was talking about Flory and Hunter, and he said you could get 40 to 45 minutes out of those two. Okay, so a couple of interesting things there. One, that would probably mean Zach Clemens not really getting minutes, right? Unless he's playing as the 4, which I guess that still is possible if you're going to play too big basketball, because think about this, the center position, you get 40 minutes per night from the center position. So if you're playing 45 minutes from the center position, which Bill Self said is possible between Hunter and Flory, that means there has to be an overlap that Flory is playing next to Hunter for, that's at least 5 minutes per game, right? That could even mean that Flory's playing next to KJ, which I think Flory playing next to Hunter sounds a little bit more intriguing to me than Flory playing next to KJ, because at least Hunter can shoot the ball, where you can invert that a little bit, and to where, Hunter is more of a positional defender, Flory can be the weak side rim protector, shot blocker. I am actually okay with them playing a handful of minutes of that, at least to see what it looks like early in the season, but I don't really want to see Flory next to KJ. I think that could be too much, stuck in the mud on the offensive side of the basketball. But I found that comment very interesting from Bill Self as we try to figure out this rotation and starting lineup. All right, what didn't we learn from this game, though, on Locked On Jayhawks? First, this episode, though, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. It's at FanDuel.com. You can get on KU Houston for Saturday. You can get KU Hoops to win the national title at 11-1 odds. So do those at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay, so what didn't we learn from this game? Well, basically everything else. There's not a lot. Like, we can't really take away if KU is a better rebounding team coming from this one. Is the three-point shooting fixed? You would have liked to see them shoot well from three, but even if they did, we wouldn't be coming away from this game and be like, see, late night in the Phog scrimmage, they killed it from three. And they did have some, like I mentioned, Shelby and Coit hitting some three, but overall it was maybe a little bit ugly there, not as good as you hope. But again, I still think they're going to be a better three-point shooting team. You definitely didn't learn how the team is going to play in terms of what are the lineups going to be, what are the rotations going to be, how is that all work? How many minutes is everybody going to play? How do the players work off of each other, right? Like, we did at least get to see Hunter playing next to KJ a little bit, but we didn't get to see how AJ Storr plays next to Hunter Dickinson. We didn't get to see how Rylan Griffin plays off of Hunter Dickinson as a three-point shooter. So there are some of these things that we just didn't learn and couldn't learn in a game like this. And just overall, how good is the team? You can, sit there and say, oh, that looked really good and that looked really good, but what if it's just the other guy on the other side didn't do well? So impossible to know there. There's only so much you can really take away, which brings us to what is next for KU. Well, back at it next Friday. And that one we are going to learn a lot more about. Still not going to have, overarching takeaways about this definitively is what the team is or what they do, because it still will be an exhibition game. But next Friday, going on the road against Arkansas, which has a lot of talent, a lot of NBA talent, a lot of former five-star players with John Calipari there. John L. Davis, who's had a really successful collegiate career so far, transferring in from Florida Atlantic. There's going to be a lot more to learn next week and a lot more about which players Bill Self trusts and who's in the lineups and the rotation, at least at that point in time, even though it still won't be a totally true lineup that probably more guys will play, or maybe the minutes will be a little bit more balanced than they would be if it was an actual game between Kansas and Arkansas in the regular season. So that's next Friday for another exhibition, and that'll be like a charity game where, money's going to a different charity. They tried to make it an NIL game, but the NCAA was like, nah, you ain't doing that. So ends up being a charity game instead. All right, that'll do it for this bonus episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you for joining us tonight or early on your Saturday morning. Check out our KU Houston preview if you haven't already, and we'll have a reaction show to whatever happens in that KU Houston game at some point over the rest of this weekend. I'm Derek Johnson. Have a good night.